Now, we asked someone for some context of the history of racism here in Saskatchewan. Dustin McNichol is a Saskatchewan historian. He joins me now. Dustin, what are some of the origins of racism or maybe anti-minority movements here in the province?
Well, there's a number of movements in Saskatchewan that we've known over time. Probably the most prominent example is the Ku Klux Klan, which established itself in the province at the end of the 1920s and the early 1930s. It was a time not unlike today where there was a great deal of economic growth and turmoil and immigration following the First World War. And a number of extremist groups, especially the Klan, established themselves in the province.
So how common was the sentiment at that time, the anti-racism or anti-minority sentiment?
It's hard to say. At its peak, the Klan claimed it had 40 or 50,000 members, and some historians have even estimated the membership at the time, at the end of the 1920s, to be around 100,000 members, including members of some mayors of small towns, prominent town councilors. So it was a fairly widespread movement, yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the KKK. How did that evolve over, from the 20s and 30s maybe to,
Yeah, so it established itself mainly at the end of 1926 and was somewhat of a racket. You had to pay about $10 to sign up for a membership, and the person who signed you up would get $4, so it was a money-making machine. The first organizers of the Klan absconded with the membership fees and left for Toronto, never to be seen again. But the movement really picked up speed with the beginning and the onset of the Great Depression at the end of the 1920s. It somewhat disappeared in the midst of the Great Depression, and historians don't entirely know why, but they do suggest that it may have been due to the simple economic misery and the need for people to come together in difficult times.
What were some of the groups that the KKK at that time and maybe through Saskatchewan's history have been against?
That's a good question. What's interesting about the local Saskatchewan Ku Klux Klan is, unlike their American counterpart, they exploited local issues. There was quite a small African Canadian population at the time, so the Saskatchewan Klan was mainly interested in Roman Catholics, minorities from countries like the Ukraine, Italians, really anyone who was not a Protestant white British person.
Now, we've seen monuments in the U.S. being taken down, Civil War leaders. Is there any sort of monuments in Saskatchewan that may be controversial in the same way that those are in the U.S.?
There are none that come to mind immediately, but of course we shouldn't forget the legacy of residential schools, some of which are still standing, at least as historical monuments and testimony to that. There is a park in Saskatchewan named after James Anderson. I'm not sure if it's named after the Premier of Saskatchewan, who was voted into power in 1929 with the help of the Ku Klux Klan, but that could be an example. Typically in Saskatchewan, we're not as good at preserving some of these monuments and things as we could be, so there perhaps aren't as many as there would be in the States. The original meeting place of the Ku Klux Klan in Moose Jaw, for example, the Empress Hotel, no longer stands. So there is a question of where does memory exist? Does it exist in places, or does it exist also in the minds and the culture of people? So I think there's work to do, not only in taking down monuments and perhaps having discussions about that, but also discussing a number of other areas where historical memory and certain beliefs may still be entrenched.
Dustin, thank you for your time.
Thank you.